What I'll do is I'll hand out the attendance thing later. I don't like bureaucracy. It's good. Okay, welcome to our revision session together. My name is Bob Souster, and my job is to help you through the examination tomorrow. Tomorrow? Yeah. So, you know, any time before the coffee break, if you want to mic yourselves up for the exam. I don't know if I am more or less open than other module directors with the exams. But I think I've thrown out some massive clues as to what's in the exam in the last couple of WebEx sessions. I don't know if you noticed them. No? Well, you might. You might get them again then. Okay. My philosophy on this is that I don't believe really that exams at this level should be a memory test, and so I'm quite prepared to tell you the subjects covered by each question. I will not give you the questions because Ted Gardner will kill me. If you think Ted's scary, the ladies in the administration, never argue with a woman. I learned it many years ago. So I will run that through with you in the first part of this session, and then we'll go through some presentations and some discussion questions as well, in order to get our little grey cells moving on all things ethical. I am so pleased to see you. It's unreal. I'm not being patronising, but I have just had 3 days with a 2-year-old in the house, and really, I mean, I'm sure you love your children, but I am at an age where I want to give them back to the owner after maybe a day. Because at the moment, my wife is getting all the plants and ornaments from 5 meters up the wall down to the proper level. Nightmare. And to make an assumption that it's a little girl shows she won't like football. But I didn't count on football in the house. The exam, then, sisters and brothers, tomorrow. It's open book. You can look at your books, you can look at your notes, and you can look at these notes too. These are summary notes. They're already on Blackboard for a couple of weeks. But they are summaries. You could easily run through them this evening. Just read through in half an hour or an hour. And the reason I produce those is so you can get the little highlighter pens out, you know, to lead you to the right areas, because the full set of notes is too big. You've just finished up not writing enough in the examination. And so really, I guess the first thing to say to you is it's impossible to give you many marks in the exam if you simply copy what's in the notes. So the best thing to do if you want to refer to something in here, and you see that Bob has written something absolutely brilliant on page 9 or something, that's relevant to a question, and you want to refer to it, don't copy it out. Just put a little footnote on it or something and refer to it. And there are some important guidelines in the examination. There are 4 questions in the exam, but you only have to do 3. The first question is 50 marks, so half the marks, spend half your time on it. And it will be typically subdivided into 4 or 5 parts. 10 for this, 8 for this, 5 for this. So it's always subdivided. The reason I'm saying it should be, not is that there are 4 exam papers, depending on time zone. Okay? So each examination has 4 separate exams. The themes of the questions are the same, but obviously the questions are different. Otherwise, you could ring someone in the States and give them the questions. And I know you wouldn't do that, of course, because we're all poor. But I think if I throw something out as a theme, I'll tell you there's a 1 in 4 chance or a 3 in 4 chance, okay, in relation to the questions. Question 2 is on regulation. If regulation is your bag, then that question's going to be a pussycat for you. If you don't like regulation, you can avoid it, but you might not like the 3rd and 4th question, then you're in trouble. Yeah. But the bar will be open. You know. The question 2 on regulation will be something along the lines of protecting customers. Why do we protect customers? What do customers want from protection? And there might be something about rules and principles in there. So we'll go through that last thing today. I leave regulation till the end of the session because it's easier going, it's black and white, it's much more straightforward stuff. I do ethics first because it's tougher, softer. Question 3 is ethics. It's an ethical issue and it's a story, probably 3 paragraphs, nothing like as long as the assignment. Probably, 3 or 4 paragraphs. And if you, I had a couple of anxious emails. Simon Gretsch, who isn't here. Simon, I don't think Simon's here, is he? No. He's from Malta, and he's an amazing guy because he writes questions. Like in an email, he writes, "Dear Bob, good afternoon, how are you?" This is like a Sunday afternoon. I was wondering if I can ask you if in an examination you would ever ask a question like the following. In other words, he's like just plugging, you know. And he should be a politician, you know.
We are interested in knowing the answer.
Yeah.
What did you write down?
Oh, I told him, but I wasn't giving any secrets away. But question number 3 will be ethics. And you might have to apply a decision-taking model. You might have to apply Kohlberg, I don't know. Probably not. I can't remember that Kohlberg is in the optional. It might be in the compulsory. Question number 4 is corporate governance. And it's about mostly about directors. And 2 of my slides up there will have the questions on. But more or less, yeah. But the point is that it doesn't become an easy option, even if I tell you the question, because I'm asking you for your opinion, an argument. I'm asking you to make a point, to defend it. Please, if you're asked for an opinion in an examination, give an opinion, back it with rationale, because even if I disagree with you, I'll give you credit. Intelligent people have a right to disagree, you know, on anything. We're here for constructive debate. That's what MBAs are about. And so please be brave enough to give an opinion. Yes, sir?
Could you repeat? Question 4 would be on corporate governance?
Corporate governance, mainly on directors. Yeah. And there'll be the usual themes there. But I'll run you through broadly the things. I think there are 3 parts to the question. 3 parts to the question. 4 exam papers, and I've got 12 bullet points, if that makes sense. So that gives you a sporting chance. Yeah, a sporting chance. The first part of the question, I've come back to the compulsory. The compulsory question's big. You've landed on your feet, I think, because it's mostly about stakeholders, I think, this time. Stakeholders and a bit on ethical stance and fiduciaries, stuff like that. So there's a stakeholder theme in it. People don't mind stakeholders. Let's draw Mendello. No, don't draw pictures unless you have to. I think the most inspirational exam performance I saw was 2 years ago. I was marking an ACCA exam paper. And this was from Kingston, Jamaica. And it wasn't very good, frankly. The pass mark's like 50%. And he wrote at the end of his script, "I'd done my best, over to you, Jesus." And of course, he should have written, I did my best, not I done my best, you know, so even that wasn't perfect. Do you know something? That guy got exactly 50%. There's a lesson in there somewhere, you know. I don't know if it's a temple, a mosque or a church, but go there tonight. Yeah. Oh dear. Go by the number of marks available for the question. If it's what I recommend to people is if it's something for 10 marks, do 15 minutes. That'll give you half an hour thinking time at the end, you know, and checking time. Because if you do that in blocks of marks, that's 2.5 hours. And somebody did ask me, you know, how much do I write in an exam? As much as you like, really. The record is 81 sides of A4, but he failed. Because he just copied the notes, like, word for word. So you can't do anything, you know, we set out to pass you. But if the guy just copied the notes for 3 hours, word for word, so what can you do? But don't write 81 pages. I think it's physically impossible for most people. The average 25-mark answer would probably be 2 to 3 sides of A4 if you've got typical writing. Quality, not quantity. That's what we're interested in. But
what is the average, sorry?
The average is 2 to 3 sides of A4 for 25 marks. So for an optional question, and remember, you've only got to do 2 out of the 3 questions in part. You know, question 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, or 2 and 4. Don't do all of them. Last time, 6 months ago, 3 people did all the questions on the paper, and it's 2 from 3. You have to do the first one and then 2 from the other 3. But it actually diluted their mark because they were too small. You know, they'd written too long. They hadn't written long enough. And so invest your time wisely. It does give you the opportunity to miss topics you don't like. Yes? And so I do that quite deliberately. You've got to do, if I really want to test something, it's going to be in the compulsory. And there will be something theoretical in the compulsory question. It could be Mendelow, it could be Gray, Owen and Adams, corporate social responsibility, it could be Kohlberg, you know, it could be Steer's moral DNA, it could be ethical decision taking, it could be any of those things. Obviously I can't be too specific, otherwise I'll be in trouble. But there will be something, but remember, you can go to the notes, you can look up the theory yourself, and then use it as a platform. If the question says, explain what is meant by, and tell me why it is important to this company, remember that the explain what is meant by is going to be very few marks, because it's knowledge. But why it's important to the company will be more marks. So if it's explain what is meant by this, and why it's important for the company, 10 marks, it's probably 2 for the knowledge, 8 for the application. Yeah, that's important. If it's critically evaluate, way up. And so, if I set you a question, hypothetically, that said, should the head of internal control in a bank report to the finance director? You know, and I know, that if you write, the head of internal control should report to the finance director in an exam paper, you are dog meat. Because the person marking it doesn't want to read that. Yeah? Because there are a million reasons why the finance director should not be in charge of internal control. One very good one is that he probably knows how to mess the system up and steal lots of money. Another is, of course, he lacks the independence. Another is he's deciding the rewards for the person. So there's a problem. But critically evaluate might give me 2 reasons why he should, but 4 reasons why he shouldn't. That's weighing up. Critically evaluating, yeah? And it's a good way to do it. If you want to use tables, bullet points, anything you like, I don't care. Please write in English, because I might have a problem otherwise. I had one candidate 2 years ago in a different paper who gave a quotation in French, which I thought was very eloquent, and then forgot to go back to English for the rest of his script. But I'm okay with French. He was lucky. I can do French and Greek and a little bit of Irish. But no, David, you can't answer in Gaelic. But yeah, as long as it's readable and understandable, it's fine. Remember, if I can't read it, I can't mark it, though. I had one absolute nightmare last year. And it wasn't even untidy writing. It was just tiny, tiny writing. And, 9 o'clock in the evening, I want a beer, right? And so it's my last exam paper for the day, 9 o'clock, close the exam paper, open the beer. And I opened this book, and it was straight off the side of an Egyptian pyramid, this writing. It was Elm Street, The Shining, all in one. The writing was terrible, and he did question 3A, 2B, 1C, all mixed up. My God. Half an hour, to do one question. I said to my wife, "Can you read it?" "No." But probably better to be untidy and readable than tidy and not readable in the examination. Short paragraphs, subheadings. It's a modern exam. It's not a major academic exercise. I'm not marking on footnotes. Actually, if you did badly on the assignment, you'll probably do better on the exam. Because the ones who did worse on the assignment were more troubled, I think, by the logistics of the assignment than the subject matter. The subject matter wasn't difficult, but it was the logistics. And the problem with all assignments in this subject is that they tend to be very broad, and it's possible to write 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 words, but you're constrained by 2,500. So the first question I get from people is, where do I start? Except Simon Gretsch in Malta, who approaches it in a different way and said, hypothetically, Bob, if I submitted an assignment that said this first, this next, this next, this next, this next, and this next, with this conclusion, would you give me a decent score? Which I thought was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. God, he's a chancer, isn't he? The one thing that really surprised me is Simon is over 30 and he's from Malta. And it surprises me that anyone gets to 30 in Malta with their driving standards. Like it's a wonder nobody dies in Malta. If you've ever driven there, you'll know. Anyway, let's talk about the subject. We're going to start with a look at ethics this morning. Because people don't like this topic, they're troubled by it. Question 3 is the most avoided question on my paper. It's the one they say no, because they feel ever so slightly uncomfortable with some of the topics. And I recall a student coming to me in Shanghai last year, and she came to desk. Chinese people don't talk much on courses, they just write. They do talk, but they talk at the back. And so I'm lecturing about ethics, and they're going, sort of thing. And they're clarifying my vocabulary of what I'm saying. And this girl, she came to me, she says, "Professor Bob," which I thought was rather nice. I said, "Yes." She said, "You are using some very terrible words." Am I? And she pointed at the screen, and I had a relativist, absolutist, deontological, teleological, and all that stuff on the chart, and she's Chinese, for God's sake. God love her, you know. She did well. The only place where it's absolute doddle is Athens. Because with a group of people in Athens, they've got no problem. All the words are Greek. So they know exactly what they mean. But then getting Greeks to talk about ethics is tougher for other reasons. They're not very good with money either. So let's talk about ethics. We're talking about right and wrong. It's subjective. It relates to our personal conduct and our business conduct, and we can get terribly confused about our personal morals and our business ethics. For example, there's a lawyer who was doing the rounds in the UK called Giovanni Di Stefano. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was the lawyer to the great and the bad. He was defending Saddam Hussein. He was defending Slobodan Milosevic after the Balkan crisis. He specialised in the bad guys. And you say to the advocate, the barrister, you know, how can you defend people who are, some say, evil? And the business ethic is that you do your job, you give a defence, because everyone is entitled to a defence. Morally, you might think is wrong. So there's a split, a dichotomy between your personal morality and your business ethics. After all, you know, does everybody who works for Carlsberg or Johnny Walker drink alcohol? Does everybody who works for Philip Morris smoke? You know, that's the difference between the two. Yet, when I was young coming into a bank, I was told, you never serve this bank properly unless you believe in our products. You know, you've got to believe in the product. Why? My big hang-up, because I'm a dinosaur compared with you guys, age-wise, you know, I came into the banking industry in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, and I always thought endowment mortgages were a rip-off. Always. And I always knew they would come back to haunt people eventually. Some people did very well with them. But they're a problem. They've been a problem for years, for a whole generation of people. But I couldn't stop my organisation selling them. I can't go to my boss and say, I don't think you should sell that because I think you're screwing the customer. Because what would he say to me? I tell you what he'd say to me. The second word would be off. Yeah? You can fill in the blank as you wish. You know, if you don't like it, go and work for somebody else, yeah? And we all see things in our banks, in our organisations that we don't much like sometimes. That's what life's about, isn't it? It's not doing what we like, it's sometimes doing what we don't want to do. And I was happy with it. I had a good comfort zone. We had 40,000 mortgage accounts in my bank for residential mortgages, not very many. EBS in Dublin. It's part of AIB now. We were the second biggest mortgage lender in Ireland. I'm not Irish, but I just landed up there. It's good fun. We had 40,000 mortgage accounts. The most possessions we had in 1 year was 43 for the whole of Ireland. 43 possessions of houses. That's less than our local caravan park in Northampton, which has got 1,000 dwellings. Because we were the good guys. We tried to help. And I don't think I could have lived with my own personal kind of 5% communist Bob, 95% enlightened Bob. I don't think I could have lived with being in an organisation that would sort of drive people from their homes and throw the kids into the gutter. We make our choices ethically, yeah? And sometimes I see a quotation that really hones in on this. It was a man called John Garnett of the Industrial Society. God rest him, he's dead now. And he says, you stand a much better chance of going to heaven if you resign once in principle in your lifetime. because it's easy to resign. The hard part is going back to your wife or your husband and kids and saying, we've got to find the mortgage next month. That's the tough bit. That's the real tough bit. Do you know what I just did, dear? You know? And so, in most capitalist societies, there will be a conflict between the common good and material gain. Because we do live in a world where, we want the best we can for our families. We're lucky because most of us have lived in a generation that's had 50 years of peace. You know? My mum and dad didn't. My granddad didn't. He was in the First World War. That wasn't fun, I believe. But we've all been given that chance. But at the same time, it creates new problems in society. It creates new issues in society. And I don't know if the Institute's going to print this, but in my discussion questions for the day, I've put one of my own quotations, and it's in the Chartered Banker magazine in 2 months' time. It's an article I've just drafted. May I read it to you? I'm going to give you this on a handout anyway. There are few people in the UK in 2014 who would admit to not being able to live on £1 million a year, and still fewer who can boast about 10% bonuses. So irrespective of the realities of markets for labour, not to mention contractual entitlements, our industry has much to learn and doesn't get it. Until it does, it will be much more difficult to rebuild reputations. And so if you're the window cleaner or you're a call centre operative on £8 an hour, if you're lucky, and somebody in the bank says, well, he's just actually taken a smaller bonus and he's only going to get $500,000 this year, don't be surprised if he doesn't cry, you know, because it's a different planet. The reality, you know and I know, that if you don't pay the going rate, they'll go to America and earn 5 times more anyway. That's the reality. But it's selling it to people, you know. The woman who served me in the bank 3 days ago, she earns less than a supermarket operator, checkout operator in Aldi per hour. And yet she gets customers saying to her, oh, well, all you people with your bonuses in the banks, I guess you get it too. You know? Yeah. It'll go. Okay. Let me pose some questions to you.
Sorry, Bob. We're going to get these slides, or it's not necessary?
You don't need them, but you can certainly have them.
What I'm saying is rather than these.
I'll sell you them.
If that's the case, it's ethical.
I've got. I didn't print them off because they're just bullet points. But but I will leave. I've got one soft copy which I'll leave on the desk for you. Or if you want to, I've got a soft copy which I can leave on the USB for you if you've got a computer with you. Or I've got one hard copy there as well. 9 slides to a page, eyesight test. Is it ever right to kill another human being?
Yes.
That, I must say, Sonia, that was very quick.
Not that I've done it before.
You haven't, no?
No.
Tell me more, as the song goes.
If it was self-defence.
Self-defence, yeah.
You're protecting
Yeah.
someone that you love, maybe a child,
Yes.
from harm
Mm-hmm.
in war.
War? Ah.
Sometimes it's even like to save the pain that they're going through. And
Just say, euthanasia.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, this could get interesting.
Debate, yeah.
We could spend the whole day on this slide.
Does it make it right or does it justify it?
That's what I'm that's what I'm asking now.
Yeah.
The thing is, why is it right or wrong? Not is it right or wrong? Because if you get somebody who's absolutely committed to the view that it's always wrong to kill, irrespective. I mean, I had these 2 guys on my doorstep a couple of weeks ago. I forget what flavour they were, and I wouldn't say anyway, just in case you're one of them. But these two guys were on the doorstep. They were American. And he said, "Good morning, sir." I said, "Good morning." He said, "Do you ever think about dying?" Said, "Yeah." I said, "When we're 2-0 down with 10 minutes left, yeah?" No, not really. And my wife goes crazy because I say, "Come on in, let's talk about it." And of course my wife is saying, "Get rid of them," you know. And he's saying, "Well, the Lord said," and he said, "This is in Luke chapter 5. I said, I think you'll find it's Matthew. And all of a sudden they get real defensive. And I was right, because I did religious knowledge at school when I was 16. And then we're going, you know, exit. But those people were absolutely convinced that that would be an absolutist argument. Wrong. To kill. Okay. Now, if you live in the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, which I suspect none of you do, it is your sacred duty to serve our fatherland and to go to the armed forces. So what are you going to do? If you think that my duty is never to take another human life, what do you do if you live in Singapore, where you go to the armed forces? Because yeah.
In real war, you're not going to kill anyone.
No. That's right. Well, the Greeks have a solution, of course, because if you're a conscientious objector to national service, because it's compulsory, you do the army for 2 years unpaid in Greece. They feed you and clothe you, but there's no salary. But if you object, they just put you in an army job with no guns. They make you do a back office job, but you still have to go. Sounds fun, doesn't it? So is it right or wrong? Is it my duty to kill sometimes a war? Is it my duty to protect my family? Or am I saving people from the consequences of my actions? And there are two angles. One's deontological, one's teleological. Deontological is duty. The other is teleological. That's what's the consequence? If I don't kill that person, they will kill my child. You know? Is it ever right to lie? Well, I'm getting a few yeses from the guys.
Depends on the situation.
Depends. That's a Greek answer.
If it's your wife.
If I could try to sum up,
yes,
I'm
please.
confused. Is in situations we exercise fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah.
Some may not agree to the exercised ethical responsibility that we do during a situation. There could always be divergent views.
Yes.
Right? So in this case, in the first bullet point, the divergent views will always occur. If I conscientiously believe in ethics, I shouldn't be killing somebody who has come to harm me.
Yes.
But the situation would demand that I have to defend myself.
Sure.
And the person gets killed. There would be two divergent views. Some would say, I could have held that person, I shouldn't have fired. And similarly, in the second bullet point, for a lawyer to defend his customer, knowing the situations, he may have to not lie, he may have to present something which he knows that it's a lie.
That's brilliant. You don't know why it's brilliant, but it's brilliant. Because you've actually raised, Sammy, a brilliant concept here called probity. Probity is giving the full picture. It's not honesty, it's more than honesty. For example, I could give you a set of financial statements that show an organisation to be doing very well, but because I've omitted crucial details, I haven't told you lies, I've just not given you the big picture. And that's one of those ethical concepts that we visit sometimes.
That's called the positioning or massaging.
Yeah, that's it. And so,
Positioning is the key, actually.
yeah, politicians are very good at it. Yeah, that's it. And so I'm not lying necessarily, but I'll take this a step further. Sometimes it's a legal duty. You know, if in a retail bank situation, if somebody comes to the counter with a transaction that's completely inconsistent with their economic well-being or their economic situation, and it's a money laundering issue, you can't serve that customer in the normal way, as you know, because it's a suspicious transaction. And so what are you going to tell that customer? Right now, the computer's running slow. Lie. My boss is having his third coffee break this morning. That might be true. You know, I'm sorry, I'm personally not authorized to do this, which is semi-truthful. But if you say, well, I'm ever so sorry, Mrs. Smith, but we have to check this one out because it's inconsistent with the money laundering regulations, and so therefore it's a reportable. You're dog meat because you've just tipped him off. And you could be in jail for 4 years. I mean, take the benefits. You know, if you go to jail, it's not all bad. You get free food, free accommodation. Your sex life might improve, but not in the way you want it to. Sorry, did I just say that? Whoops. And he's got it. But you've got to lie. Otherwise, you're breaking the law. But my mum and dad told me I should never lie. You know, my mum said, did you do that? No. Bang! Yes, you did. Why did you ask then? And is it ever right to break the law? Is it ever right to break the law? Yes? You said that rather too quickly.
Yes,
I have done that. I would.
Yeah.
If I have somebody who needs immediately the first aid,
Yeah.
then my duty is to save that person and ignore if I can and break the traffic light or even ignore
Yes.
the police person, because for me, according to my self-belief, the human's life is more important.
Yes.
That's where I get confused. My self-beliefs continue to disarm me in terms of adopting the ethical part.
Yeah.
And being in a bank, I'll be honest, for the benefit of the being in the bank, I often lie in terms of pricing. You are the best price customer. There's nobody in our bank. Trust me, I'm just lending you at 10 basis points.
Brilliant.
There's nobody.
I'm so glad
I'm
I
dying.
came today. Yeah.
So what my mama taught, according to that, I should quit banking. I can't.
Yeah. You should take up selling sand in Saudi Arabia. Wow. That's good. That's good, yeah. Is it ever right to break the law? My boss had a party piece in the bank. He was the general manager for administration. He was a monster. I don't know if you've ever done Theory X, Theory Y, Douglas McGregor stuff. You know, the Theory X is the kick-ass. Hang them, flog them. If they don't do it, fire them. Why should we thank our staff? It's what they're paid to do. Old-fashioned, you know. Appraisals were fun. And he was scary, scary guy. To the day he died, I always called him Mr. Scully. Because he was that generation, you know. I called my chief executive Patrick. It's different, old school, new school, you know. Pat O'Reilly was like, roll the sleeves up, change the light bulbs. But Mr. Scully, we had a rule in Ireland that if a joint account had more than £5,000, Irish pounds in those days, and one person died on the account, it had to be cleared by the taxman for capital acquisitions tax, which is capital gains tax. So the rule was you had to get a clearance certificate from the revenue, but we'd get these widows come in who'd just lost their husbands the day before, or men who'd lost their wives the day before, and they'd have £5,000 and £5,000 and 50 pence, or £5,100, and they need the money. The bank account's frozen. What are you going to do? You know. And his attitude was, pay the woman. She's just lost her husband. But Mr. Scully, the law says we can't do that. It's £5,000, otherwise we need a clearance table. Pay the woman, we're not detectives. But Mr. Scully will get into trouble with the law. The auditors will pick it up, you know, KPMG will pick it up, won't they? If they pick it up, that's fine. We'll explain to them that it was a mistake. And it's not a significant mistake. The woman needs the money. But what do we do if the revenue kick off? If the revenue kick off, we will pay the fine. Because our reputation's more important than the money. God, I wish he was around today. You know? To hell with the law. The woman's lost her husband. I like it. You know? A nice attitude to business. Is it ever right to break the law? You bet. You bet. Nice straight highway in Germany. Whoosh. Fundamental ethical principles. I don't think there's much in the exam about these, so I won't go through them in any huge detail. They go on to the next slide as well. It's useful to know what the words mean, but it's also useful to know right now that no way is the exam paper going to say, tell me what is meant by honesty. Tell me what is meant by judgment. But some of the things towards the top of the list are quite important, I think, in terms of things like integrity. Integrity is having high moral standards, yeah? We all know what integrity is. Now you try to write it down and explain it. Objectivity is very important, I think, as a concept in our study. You know, looking at things from an objective perspective. Looking in from the outside. And these concepts are all in the early pages of the notes. They're on page 5 and 6 of these notes. I can give you these. I'm not following this through as a script this morning, so don't try to follow it through as I speak, because you'll just get confused, as people generally do on my classes. But this is part 1. This is last-minute panic stuff to read before you go into the examination. And it's summary notes part 1. The building on the front cover is the Gherkin in London, I think. It's very pretty, isn't it? Yeah. And if you look on page 5 and 6, it's what all these words mean. Over the page, on the next slide, no, I haven't got any. Let's talk about different approaches. These words are useful, and hypothetically, if you were to sit an exam tomorrow, the last 2 on that slide might be more important than the other 2. Did I just say that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, you didn't. Almost good to
buy. Yeah. By God, keep up. These two are more important. So, because you might get asked to compare something from a deontological and a teleological viewpoint. And so let's work down the list. Absolutism is sometimes called a dogmatism. And absolutism looks at right or wrong. My brother-in-law had a problem. He worked for IBM, the computer company, as a project manager, and he was in Riyadh. And he got drunk, and the cops turned up. And that combination is quite bad if you're in Riyadh. Yes? But it got worse because he was sick all over the cop as well. Saudi Arabia has what we call an absolutist approach to certain rules, yes? It's right or wrong, and there's a line in the sand. Our business has changed in this respect fundamentally over the years. When I came into banking, you had to sign letters with a fountain pen, never a ballpoint. Sammy, you'd be dog meat in my bank because you weren't allowed a beard. You were allowed a moustache, so you'd have been all right, Dinesh. But not a beard, so you could grow it round to there. You know? In the Nationwide Building Society, you can have a beard, but you can't grow one. In other words, if you want a beard, you've got to grow it in your holiday because you look scruffy while it's growing. Yeah? You had to ask your supervisor's permission in one bank to get married. Yes. And there were rules, lines in the sand. You know, you never transgressed. That, well, if you went overdrawn, it was probably not worth the ear bashing. Yeah.
Going back to the example that asking the permission from the manager to get married, maybe this is like one guy would like to submit his liquefaction request, and it's not maybe the objection not to go for marriage, but just to scheduling the leave.
Yes, yes. But I mean, you needed permissions almost to breathe in those days, you know. So it's a most astonishing kind of different environment today. And so my friend Paul Ingham, I think, he set the record for being the quickest out the door of his bank because he brought his dog to work with him. Now, just imagine if you brought the dog to the office. What your boss would say. Well, he wouldn't say anything, he'd be speechless. Yeah? Relativism admits grey between the black and the white. Yeah? And so there was an interesting debate here because 2 or 3 months ago in Marks and Spencer, a relatively upmarket food purveyor, there was debate because Marks and Spencer do not force their Muslim staff to handle alcohol in stacking the shelves. And I think the objection is really with consuming it, not handling it. But Marks and Spencer goes a step further and says, look, if it's your faith and you believe in it, then you're uncomfortable with it, we won't make you do it. Which I think is a very enlightened approach to the business. But it's a very strange, when I go to Malaysia sometimes, which I love, Malaysia is organised chaos, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the cars never hit each other. They just look like it.
It never moves.
Yeah. But 70% of Malaysia is Muslim. And so if I go to the bank, I can take a standard, what you or I would consider to be a standard mortgage at 7 or 8%, or I can have a Sharia compliant mortgage where I borrow money and pay back a rent over time because they don't wish to offend the doctrine of riba. You know, giving and receiving interest. And so I've got the choice. That's relativist, a society that accommodates both. And you've got to accommodate both in some cases. In my classroom in Malaysia, it's extraordinary. You've got the Indian guys. I was talking to Fazal about this morning at breakfast. You've got the Indian guys. They could sell anything. Like very extrovert. Incredibly confident, self-confident. You've got the Malaysian guys who are so laid back they're nearly asleep. You know, it's the closest I've seen to a trance without marijuana. Because in Malaysia, of course, they don't have to try. They get all the best university places and best housing. And you've got the Chinese guys who just write and write and write and don't say anything. You know? And I always say to my class, you know, the luckiest people in this classroom are the Hindus. You know, because you've got so many gods to pray to before you go into the exam room. You know, you've got like contingency planning. Amazing.
5% each will pass.
Yes, yeah, that's it. But relativism has got to happen in that sort of environment. Look at the Swiss. You know, Switzerland's beautiful. Boring, yes, but beautiful. Chocolate box chalets, high mountains, and so on. It's not particularly innovative. It's, what was it they said in The Third Man? 1,000 years of peace and all they invented was the cuckoo clock. But you've got Germans, you've got French, you've got the Italians in the south, the Ticino. In a referendum recently, the German part of Switzerland, they were voting on compulsory military service because everyone goes to the army in Switzerland for 6 weeks a year until you're 35 years old. Once a year. If you're a man. Okay? Men have to put up with so much. The Germans voted overwhelmingly, over 60%, in favour of continuing military service. The French part of Switzerland voted against. The Italians, I don't know if they turned up. You know, they were too busy having a wine with their dinner. Why? Are the French kind of more hippie? No. It's because all the munitions factories, all the military vehicles factories and infrastructure are in the German part of Switzerland. They're protecting jobs, you know. But it has to be a confederation of ideas, of attitudes and beliefs. You know, half the country is Protestant, the other half's Catholic. So now we come down to these two things. Deontological. You've all read the Institute's Code of Ethics, yeah? Of all the things we will do and we promise to do as good bankers, yeah? They're generally cast in the form of duties. Deontological ethics is about my duty. And sometimes those duties are accepted from very early childhood because they're considered to be values that we should all have. And sometimes they're instilled in us by the company, the party line. But we agree to go along with it because that's the way it is. Teleological ethics looks at it a different way. It looks at the consequences. Consequences to whom? Do you know, in Bob's planet, the worst thing on earth that was invented were these damn things. And you say, well, why has he got such a primitive phone? It's because my smartphone died yesterday. It's a Sony thing. It's an Xperia. Yeah, and it just won't switch on. This one does. It's old, like me. So you're in a railway carriage. And somebody's phone goes off and you can hear, the national anthem. It's the ringtone. Actually, in my classroom here 18 months ago, we had a brilliant ringtone because I was talking about deontological and teleological ethics. Somebody's phone went off in the classroom and the ringtone was like people having sex. And he was dead embarrassed because he forgot to switch it off. Wonderful. Now, I don't know about you. Caught you. I don't know about you, but why is it when people answer a phone on a train, they don't seem to remember it has a microphone in it so you don't have to shout? And everybody in the carriage can hear the conversation. Yes, we're just coming into Watford Junction now. Yeah. Are we? So I would instantly confiscate these on a train, take them in a big bag, wait till the train gets to 160 kilometres an hour and throw them out the window. All of them. I'm not very radical. That's absolutist. What would be the consequentialist approach here, the teleological approach in terms of phones? I'm a train company manager, and Bob comes along and says, Bob hates mobile phones, he thinks you should ban them from the trains. What would be the consequence of banning them from the trains? Consequence to whom? Well, banning them completely is an absolutist solution, and it's an egoist solution. Egoist is because I don't like them, you can't have them. Okay? And so it's from my point of view, it's quite selfish, but Adam Smith, the famous economist, actually said egoism works because egoism created the Industrial Revolution. Those great innovators in spinning and weaving and in iron and steel and the railways, they didn't do it because they loved society. They wanted to get rich. And they built up companies and factories that employed thousands and thousands of people. Egoism works.
But it would depend on the power of that person.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it depends how the power is wielded. So we've all come across industrialists, some of them in recent times. Robert Maxwell, the guy who ran Enron, I forget his name. In my country, the guy at Bearings who screwed up the derivatives, Leeson. They wielded power for their own benefit. Leeson was stupid. He never made any money out of it, really. There are people also in that position. Robert Owen, who created the New Lanark Mills in Scotland, who built houses and schools and churches for his workers. Now, if you go into Birmingham, and I go into Birmingham from the wrong side, really, from the east, but if you go into Birmingham from the west, open your car window and breathe in. What can you smell? Don't say Balti curry. Because you get the best Balti curry in Britain, in Birmingham. No, if you drive in from the southwest, you will smell chocolate. And it's beautiful. Cadbury. Cadbury's chocolate is a mystery. It's got the lowest cocoa content of almost any European chocolate, but British people love it. Cadbury's chocolate is like you've died and gone to heaven. More the better. I love chocolate. Oh. And you breathe it in, and you get on a bus and you can smell it off people's clothes who've been working in the factory. You know, you can smell it. But the Cadbury company occupies an area of Birmingham called Bourneville. Bourneville was a brand once of dark chocolate, but Bourneville is the district, and the Cadbury family, who were Quakers, they built the community, the houses, the schools, the surgeries, the hospital, and it's all still there. You know, the enlightened approach. That's not egoist, but it comes from egoism of people bettering themselves. Now, why don't we say, going back to the railway carriage, why don't we have one silent carriage where the phones aren't allowed and 5 carriages where they are? Because the majority of people want to use the phone. But the minority object to it. That's utilitarian. Utilitarian is serving the greater good, you know? And it means that if you don't like using the mobile phone, you're going to be squashed up like this, you know? It might actually be more pluralist because you're catering for both in a little way. You know, you're giving a small bit of space to those. The funniest manifestation of this is at airports abroad. You can't do it in Britain, but in airports abroad, they've got these kind of booths for smokers. And I don't reckon you need cigarettes at all if you go near one of those. Because if you open the door, like this huge cloud comes out of them, you know? You probably go through about 4 packets equivalent by walking past it. And that's trying to be pluralist. Pluralist is consensus, trying to help out those who, you know, are in the minority. the persecuted. God help them. Know what is meant by deontological and teleological, just in case it appears on an exam paper. Who said that?
No one.
That one is a 1 in 4, by the way. It might not, but it isn't difficult. Deon, duty. Teleological, consequentialist. Okay, and so briefly, deontological ethics is based on duty, universal principles, usually right and wrong. Don't worry about Immanuel Kant and his categorical imperatives. It will not come up on the paper. And it probably will not destroy your life if you don't study it in detail. Why not, Bob? It's really interesting. Teleological, based on consequences. The utilitarian approach serves the greater good. This is John Stuart Mill, the famous economist. Egoism, I decide what's best for you. And pluralist is consensus. Consensus is trying to accommodate everyone's wishes in society. Marks and Spencer is pluralist, you know, by saying to people, if you're uncomfortable with alcohol, you don't have to serve it. I think it's good that that's the case. Hey, Toblerone. I just found the name cards 1 hour into the session. Hey, Sonia, you got a name card? Yeah. Would you like to? Hey. Yes. Would you like to pass them along, please? This is good because I can pick on people. And there you go, Sammy. I brought yours specially. Yeah. Okay. Have a look at some names. First of all, does anyone think that Adolf Hitler was good? If so, we've got a problem. He did, yeah. Do you know something? I looked in the German telephone directory 4 weeks ago, and there are no Hitlers in the German telephone book. I was surprised. Yeah, I was going to a German football match, as you do. No, the point I make is that there's a general view, somewhat reasonably, that Hitler was not a good person. Why was he not a good person? Genocide, fanaticism, yeah. It offends our perception of duties. And no, I'm not going to give you a punchline where I say Hitler was good. You know, to most of us, we would all agree. What about Gandhi? Most of us would say good. Peaceful. Peaceful change. In much the same way as Nelson Mandela in the modern world. A similar kind of ethos. In his day, of course, he was considered by his opponents to be a revolutionary. A dangerous radical, yeah? Takes us down to this guy at the bottom. Gerry Adams. He's some strange character, isn't he? Gerry Adams was the leader of Sinn Féin, the Irish. It was the political wing of the Irish Republican Army. And so for many, many years, he was regarded as being extreme, dangerous, evil. Yeah, today he's regarded, if you like, as more of a peacemaker. This marvelous conversion. The point I make is that we see things in terms of duties that conform with what we think is right or wrong. And so my grandfather, he died in the 60s, like many years ago, he gave me an encyclopedia that was produced in the 30s, and it said how wonderful the change was that was going on in Italy and Germany under Mussolini and Hitler, who were revolutionizing these devastated economies and bringing them into the modern age with great hospitals and roads and motorways. And you think, wow, you know. It's a function of time and perception as to what is good and evil. But it's also the door to something I didn't talk about much on the WebEx. And that's another branch of ethics. We've had teleological, we've had deontological, this is virtue ethics. Virtues is about what we see as good and bad. And so over the years, don't worry about the Greek stuff. You won't be asked to reproduce that in an exam. It's just illustrative. But some believe that ethical behaviour arises from pursuing certain personal qualities. So we see Gandhi as being serene. Hitler, in his day, was perceived as being abstentious because Hitler was a non-drinker, non-smoker. If you like, a role model for your kids when he was younger. Some role model, eh? You know, he was like, he's the boyfriend you take home to meet the grandmother. And so over time we come up with these concepts of phronesis, wisdom, intelligence and prudence, you know. These are ancient Greek concepts. In other words, if you're a wise person, you will make good decisions. If you're not a wise person, you'll make ill-conceived decisions. And a lot of this is about pursuing the highest human good, eudaimonia. And if you're really interested in Aristotle's 9 principles, I'll talk to you about them later, but they're not in the exam, and you don't need them in the next 24 hours. So look at Wikipedia. This is the quick route. I would get shot by Ted Gardner for saying, look at Wikipedia. You know, and he probably watched this video afterwards. Football is my religion. Meadow Lane is my church. That's Notts County in the 3rd division. Someone who has fits of depression, obviously. Okay. Let's talk about some theories, because these might be useful tomorrow. It's quite possible you could get a question about moral reasoning. And it's not concerned with good and bad, but it's concerned with how we arrive at that. How do we get to it? Now one writer called Haidt, who's not in the notes, says it's all a load of rubbish because we decide what is good and bad instinctively through the way we're socialized, through the way we grow up, what our parents tell us, you know, what our grandparents tell us. And so if you've got somebody like Katy Perry, the singer, if you have to. I believe her mother, either a mother or grandmother, was a preacher. Yeah? The guys who play in the Kings of Leon are from a religious family, aren't they? And so that is bound to affect their moral reasoning, how they arrive at certain decisions. So you're going to say...
Yeah, the question is, in some cases, some questions in the study guide, there are unanswered at the end of the page, right? But sometimes the answer is irrelevant, but it's relevant somehow, but it's, they use another example for the given example. Is that appropriate also? They can use the same approach?
You can, yeah. I mean, the best approach in an exam is different to an assignment in a sense, because in an exam you're time limited, and there's another angle as well. This is why, again, if you did really, really, really well in the assignment, you might be less comfortable with an exam, and if you did really badly in an assignment, you might be more comfortable in an exam, because you're time limited and constrained, and so you have to take quite a direct approach because of the time limit. You know, you've only got so long to write, and so it's really how much of a support can I give to my answer in the time available. And so when you do an exam answer, your best approach is to say, what is the essential content that I have to give? and what's the nice to give. And then if you want to add some bullets at the end, you get some credit for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question, you do not just prefer just to copy paste something from the book. What about if I copy paste some information and then come up with my examples?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely
Just
fine.
to show you that
Yeah.
I'm aware.
Yeah.
But sometimes the examples doesn't come or just a week, but just I understood what that meaning.
Yeah, I mean, one problem that people have had with the exam in the past, and it never occurred to me, so I've tried to incorporate it in the guidelines on these classes, is that sometimes people miss the question. And the reason, you might think it's obvious, and it is, but it's not when you're in an exam room. Because you see things and you read things differently in an exam room. I love exams personally, because I'm quite competitive in that sense. For example, when I did a law paper a few years ago, I went into the exam with probably 10 cases that the examiner had probably never heard of, because I went and looked them up deliberately. Just take that, turkey, you know nothing, you know? Brilliant. I gave him one that never existed. It was Taylor versus Stewart, 1921. There's no such case, but he didn't know that. Jesus, did I just say that? But the point is, I mean, I set a question a year ago. It's probably on Blackboard. I'm not sure. It was something along the lines is, why is it important for this bank to know its stakeholders? Why is it important for the bank to know its stakeholders? And what a lot of people did was write about who the stakeholders were and what they wanted, which was an answer about stakeholder claims. And that might come up this time, stakeholder claims. But the question was, why do we need to understand stakeholders? And actually, I'd go for a much more direct answer. What some of them pay our salary, right? You know, how many people say that nowadays? I'm a customer and I pay your salary. You know, do what I want. People are empowered now. Some of them are very powerful. Some can shut us down. The regulator. You know, ask the Popular Bank of Cyprus, Laiki. So they're very powerful. Some of them are very interested in what we do. So lobby groups, you know. And so I could think of 4 or 5 bullet points, but then, you know, state the obvious as well. It's important to understand stakeholders' demands because we've got an ethical duty to do so. These are people who participate in our business. These are people who show an interest in our business. These are people who fund our business, you know. So it's only right to do so. So all the stuff about maintaining market confidence, maintaining customer confidence is very valid. 10 marks, can you think of 10 reasons? No, of course you can't. Can you think of 5 for 2 marks each? Yes, I can. 10 out of 10, move on. You're 20% of your way to passing the exam. No, you're not. You're more than 10. You're 25%. Yeah. You know, you can do very well that way. And one thing about the exam is that it's quite additive. Additive means you're not looking like an assignment of what's the overall quality. Because I don't write comments on assignments. You know, what's the overall view? I don't like the criteria personally, but you know, I think you can generally get a feel by looking at the whole picture. With an exam answer, you're saying, did he make that point? Did she make that point? You know? So tick, tick, tick. It's box ticking in an exam. Suits a lot of people. Yeah. Highest mark last time was 83%. Oh, yes. And it was a different person. I accused Gillian King of getting 83%, and it wasn't her. She gave, she's a person from another group. And very bright lady. But there was an example in this script, because we blind mark, we don't know who you are when we mark your exam paper. And there was an example in the 83% one about a private bank, and Gillian works for a private bank, so I just assumed it was her, but it wasn't. But that's a hell of a score. Yeah. I would love you all to emulate it tomorrow. Moral reasoning is about how we come to the decision as to what is right and wrong, and not really whether the decision is right or wrong. Let me draw this a little bit further. Some of you might recognize this. This is some discussion questions for today. And this is... yes, this isn't the exam questions. I'll sell you those at lunchtime. The economic rent increases as the day goes on, yeah. David Ricardo, yeah. Oh my God. No, you'll be fine. Oh, I can handle that, yeah, that's good. Just taking a checkup on hieroglyphics, yeah? No, that's fine. Yeah, yeah. What was it one person wrote recently? The Bribery Act 2010, I think, is one of the most significant pieces of legislation, like the other 20 laws that I am forced to write about this term. Brilliant. Love it. People have got the guts to say that in an exam. Look at question 1 on here. No. Look at question 2. Question 2. Noreen found a national lottery ticket in the street. The ticket appears to have been purchased for a draw that was held 2 months ago, but the ticket was in surprisingly good condition and still valid. Thinking nothing would come of this, she checked the numbers. To her surprise, she discovered that the ticket had winning numbers, entitling the purchaser to £78,000. That, David, is about 82,000 pints of beer from Tesco. Yeah? To put it into context. Okay. Not bad, eh? Yes. Weak supply. Kohlberg and Steer analyse the alternative actions that Noreen may take with reference to Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning and Steer's moral DNA. This is Kohlberg. Basically, Kohlberg's easy because Kohlberg's theory was about how children learn. So he analysed young children and then older children and older children. He concluded that we go through a phase. He says it's a sequence. I disagree with it, personally. But it was a very small sample. It's not particularly statistically good, what Kohlberg did. Kohlberg said the pre-conventional is what we get from school. Pre-conventional is where we form judgments based on what is right and wrong under threat of punishment or prospect of reward. So we conform to good because we're rewarded for thinking good. You get a gold star from the teacher. Or, I was going to say a pat on the knee, but you can't do that nowadays in schools. It's suggestive. This extends sometimes to kind of adult life. So salesmen quite often will do things because they are scared they will miss their target. And so because they're scared they might miss their target, they might missell payment protection insurance, you know? Or they might sell things they shouldn't sell, or more than they should sell, or something different to what the customer wants. And sometimes we will pursue a line because we know it will reward us in the form of a pat on the back, promotion, enhancement, even reputation. We're seen as the star salesman because we achieve that, and that. And the pre-conventional is the primitive view. Kohlberg said, you know, if your child gets onto the kitchen table to reach the cookies, and breaks a cup, breaks 5 cups, compare that with the child who gets onto the kitchen table to take the drying cloth to dry up the washing up and breaks 1 cup. And when Kohlberg asked children which was the most bad, it was the one who broke 5 cups, not the one who broke 1 cup. They're measuring against the output and the consequence. And the pre-conventional looks at it in that sense. In the classroom, it can work. For example, I'm 62 years old, and I can still tell you force is that which changes or tends to change a body's state of rest or uniform motion in a straight line. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? That's Newton. I think it's physics. It might be chemistry. I'm not sure. It's science anyway. And I wasn't good at it. Why do I remember that? Because I learned it when I was 14 actually. Why do I remember Newton's law? I'll tell you why. We had this science teacher. His name was Jones. He was Welsh. Well, he would be with a name like Jones, wouldn't he? He was actually 2nd generation Welsh. And he was a little guy. And little guys have got a hang up sometimes because they're small. I know that because I'm quite small. And I always remember this guy because he'd say, right, we're going to learn Newton's laws, and if you don't know it by tomorrow, you're all in detention. You know? Like this. He used to walk like this, Jones, and his nickname was the Penguin, as in Batman. But worse still was that he had a lisp. He used to speak like this with a speech impediment. So people used to take the... No, don't go there. Which made him extraordinarily violent in the classroom. You could hit kids then, you know? So he'd say, right, what's such and such a law? You! Like this. And he'd stand over you like this. Because, of course, for the first time, he's tall. And you'd say, I don't know. Now, in teaching, you're told to what you're told to do, and what I'm told to do is say, right, does anybody else know? Can anyone else help you? That's the normal thing to do in a classroom. Why don't you know? Are you stupid? You know? And this was like all day, this guy. Now, you're going to remember force is that which changes or tends to change, etc., if you've got a teacher like that. Because he used to scare the hell out of me. And that's pre-conventional. That's really pre-conventional. It can be another form of pre-conventional in the sense that you're worried about letting your parents down and what they will think of you if you fail your degree or if you fail an exam or you know, it's a bit like, I don't know if it's before your time probably, but a guy called Mick Hucknall, who used to be a singer in a band called Simply Red. And they were quite big in their day, I think. It's not my sort of stuff. I'm more a Grateful Dead person. But Mick Hucknall is a Manchester lad. He must have made millions, mustn't he? You know, over the years. He supports Manchester United, for God's sake. You know, but, you know, we forgive him for that. And funnily enough, he comes from Manchester, which is even more surprising. Now, he tells the story that he came off tour and he'd been to America. They'd done a tour of Brazil and Argentina, and the band was playing to 60,000 capacity audiences. This is in the 1990s. Massive, massive act. They'd gone to Vienna in Europe, they'd gone to Hamburg, you know, all these places. And he got home, he went to see his grandmother. And his grandmother asked him where he'd been, you know. And he told his granny that I was in Florence, and we were in Rome, and we were in Madrid and Barcelona, and so on. And she got a cup of tea, you know, and she said, that sounds really good, Michael, really good. She said, I suppose you'll get a proper job sooner or later. Because like the stereotype, you know, she wanted him in here, conventional. And being a singer in a rock band was not conventional. Many actors face this when they become actors, because it's not a proper job. Banking is. You see, if you go into banking, they're proud of you. But they might not be in the future, you know. I was doing a course last year in Mongolia, and like I just wish I had clients who'd send me to Barbados or Bermuda, you know. But I was going to Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar. It's lovely, actually. And the client sent me an email. Could you send your CV, Bob? I said, yeah, if you want. So I sent the CV, and she sent me another email. Said, it says here you worked for a bank. I said, yeah. She said, do you really want me to tell the students that? And I thought that was a really strange response, you know. Where did that come from? Do you want to admit that you work for a bank? And of course, what I didn't realize is she was Russian. She came from an environment in which being a banker was kind of frowned upon a bit because of the Russian banking crisis in the 1990s. They're the bad guys. You know, if you go on a game show and you admit to being a banker, they're boo, you know. It's like being a taxman. And so the reputation can't be guaranteed in that sense. Now, the conventional is where we comply with expectations of our peers, our family. You know, conventional is what would people expect you to do in a given situation? What would others consider to be right? Or what would others consider to be wrong? Now, you look at that lottery ticket. If I find that lottery ticket on the floor and it's worth 78,000, I might make a risk-reward decision there and say, if I put that in my pocket, will I be caught? Will I be found out? Will I be prosecuted because it's stealing by finding? What's the probability of someone coming along? Or you might say, if I hand it in, the cop will just cash it anyway. Not that cops would do that, would they? Now, the conventional is what is the right thing to do in terms of what my colleagues, my family, others think around me, yeah? What should I do based upon, you know, pressures in society to conform to do right? And so if you go back to my hit list of names, John Lennon was on there, wasn't he? Good or bad? Well, he was a remarkable man, I think, John Lennon. Apparently quite an unpleasant person by those who knew him. But
you could argue that ticket in different scenarios.
Yeah.
Like if there is a claim, there's a place advertisement to return the ticket, or you're not supposed, like a check where your stolen check cannot be. Then this is not belong to the nobody knows.
Yeah.
Then probably like if you give it to another person anyway, he's going to cash it. So might as well go and cash it.
The reasoning really is pre-conventional in the sense that, or it might be conventional in that what would any of my friends do? Yeah. And your friends would put it in their pocket. Now, going back to those stereotypes of convention and non-conventional behaviour, if you go to Liverpool, there's a John Lennon airport. If you go to Warsaw in Poland, there's a John Lennon street. I sense he would have been appalled by all this if he was still alive. But when I was a kid in the 60s, my mum and dad used to say, ugh, they're horrible, they've got long hair. You know, they sing stupid songs. You know, like the Beatles weren't exactly every mother and father's idea of fun for their children. And the point I'm making is that the view of conventional changes over time. In 1972, on the day that Leeds beat Arsenal 1-0 in the cup final, I was at university and I sat in a field watching a rock band with my girlfriend at the time. I'd love to remind her of that. She's a principal at a school now. And we sat watching these groups in a field near Wigan. And one of the guitar players, Jerry Garcia, was considered to be the Antichrist by the American establishment, anti-Vietnam, took copious amounts of drugs, LSD, marijuana, God knows what. You know, just what you don't want your kids to do. Right? When he died in 1995, there was a minute's silence on Wall Street. A whole generation of people who went through that anti-Vietnam thing in America, the radical became the conventional. Amazing. It's the only thing that stopped Wall Street until 9/11. Amazing. Because it was no longer considered to be radical or different. And it changes over time enormously. Post-conventional is where we take a higher view, an ethical view of right and wrong in terms of universal principles that we should all adopt.
Or the basic value.
Yeah.
The low plane. Which is the low plane.
Yes, there are. Now that's a good point because each one of these has two planes. Yeah, and the lower plane, which should be basic values,
And the higher plane
is universal values for society. Perfect. Yeah, you've got an extra 5% there. Now, Kohlberg's view is that we go through these as phases. And as you get older, you move towards this one. I don't think that's right. I think sometimes we regress. For example, if I went back to a payroll today and went to work for the university on a salary, I'd be much more worried about being compliant with the rules, not losing my job because of my age, my circumstances, than I would 20 years ago, when I was considered probably to be more of a loose cannon in the bank. A bit different. I would regress. I'd go back that way if I went back into the workforce. So I haven't got a proper job. You know, I'm a partner with my wife in a consultancy. That's not a proper job. I've got a boss. Excuse me, dear, I'm standing under your foot. But it's a very simple theory to apply, yeah? And hypothetically, you could get this in an examination, either as part of a compulsory question where it might typically be worth 5 or 6 marks. There's good news, bad news. My computer's in the boot of the car out there with the questions on. The bad news is I've got the keys in my pocket. Or it could come up as a 25-mark question. The point is, if it isn't in the compulsory, it's in the optionals. But there's something on Kohlberg in there. And I think on one of the 4 papers, it gives you a choice of Kohlberg or Steer. So it's probably best not to do both, because you can get all the marks by just one of them. If it says either or, you know. Steer's easy. And I don't know if any of you did the test on the ethicability. I came across as a rule breaker on that test, which was an interesting one. I think I must be an anarchist deep down. Principled conscience, that's duty. I give the lottery ticket in because it's the right thing to do. I'm a good citizen, yeah? Principled conscience. And that's also probably conventional or post-conventional in some ways with Kohlberg. Then social conscience is, what's the consequence? What would be the case if, what would arise if someone found out? What would arise if everybody acted in this way? Social conscience is, what's my impact on society? The last one is, am I compliant with the laws? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? And Steer's thing really is based upon this notion that you should probably respond not to just one of them, but you might be in primary mode for one of them and secondary for another. Yeah? So you might be a bit of this and a bit of this, or a bit of all three. And you say, well, that's no theory, that's just a cop-out. It doesn't tell me anything. No, that's what theories are for. And so the typical reaction I had from a guy on the WebEx a couple of years ago was, Bob, this is a load of tosh. I say, what's a load of tosh? He said, well, it's just airy-fairy, you know. I said, well, why? What's the problem? He said, the theories. They're just theories, Bob. Why can't we just answer the question with a common sense answer? And you can. You can. But look, when you went to school or college, you might have done some economics, yeah? You do things like supply curves, demand curves. How many of us have drawn a supply-demand curve since we left school? How many of us actually thought that in business people go around drawing supply and demand curves? Nobody does. Well, I don't think they do. Because it's a model that gives us value theory and price determination and effects of maximum price and minimum price and elasticity, and it teaches us that's what the theories are for. They're not to actually determine, you know, real life cases. It's what we can measure against. I think it's very useful to do that sometimes. Just to finish off, because you'll be looking for some caffeine soon, I think. It says here, break for refreshments 2 minutes ago. So I'll be quick. There isn't a lot of this stuff in the exam, but there's a bit. But ask yourself, what's a profession? And one of the most fantastic, memorable people I had on my course here was a guy from the Financial Services Compensation Scheme in London doing this MBA course. And that's the scheme that puts together this 85 grand if your bank goes bust, yeah? And he was great because he stood up in the course, he said, of course banking's not a profession, Bob. And immediately you could see the old blood pressure rising around the room. Yeah, go on, tell him. You know, I was like cheerleading from the side because I didn't have to talk for the next half hour because he really wound them up. Banking's not a profession. So tell me more, Nigel. Over to you, you know. And his view really is that if you're a doctor, you can get struck off. If you're a lawyer, you can get struck off. If you're an accountant, you can probably get struck off, and you might not ever practice again. But you can go from bank to bank and screw them up one after the other. I mean, there's one guy who's made almost a career of it. What's the guy's name? Andy somebody. That's him. Yeah, so sorry, that's being recorded. It's astonishing, really. I mean, I have nothing against the guy because I don't know him and I don't know what he does. But Andy Hornby was the guy who was supposed to have screwed up Lloyd's, isn't he? Was it Lloyd's? I think it was Lloyd's. HBOS, that's it. Yeah, and after he screwed up them, he went and screwed up somebody else. And then, of course, Boots, the chemist, took him on as chief executive, and the shareholders went nuts. Why are you employing him? You know, it's almost like employing the guy who shot Barbie's mum, you know. And then he went somewhere else. But these guys have no problem in getting a job. Yet, at the same time, did you see that article in Chartered Banker 3 or 4 months ago? And it was the guy who blew the whistle in one of the banks. And he said he hasn't even had a job interview in 5 years because he did the right thing. He did what he thought was ethically right, went to the bosses, blew the whistle, lost his job, and nobody will touch him for a job interview anymore. His career is in complete limbo because he's untouchable. That's terrible, isn't it? You know, because we're all saying, yeah, blow the whistle, do the right thing. Okay, you blow the whistle then. Yeah, you do it.
Because the other guy is even perceived in the society
Yeah.
who can help as more intelligent and he has something, he has the rational for what he is losing or gaining, and then probably that's the way he's getting away.
Yeah. Well, here's an experiment you can go to support the view. If you want to engage in some petty crime for a while, maybe stealing things from shops or hijacking lorries or protection rackets in the East End, and then you go along to the cops and you say, I've been a criminal now for 3 months and I'd like to blow the whistle on him, and him. Of course, you get locked up as well because you've been a criminal. Have a guess what will happen to you when you go to jail for blowing the whistle on the other criminals. Here's if you're lucky, you might keep the fingers on one hand. Or your toes. But if you're a man, you might be speaking in a very high voice. Because it's not a value in society that's valued, that's appreciated. Blowing the whistle makes you a pariah. Now, who's the great hero in Uruguay and Liverpool? Luis Suarez, yeah. Now, is anybody here Ghanaian? Good man. What do you think of Luis Suarez, Daniel? Yeah? Yeah? Concrete boot, Indian Ocean, right? Right. Why? Because he put the ball over the bar with his hands. Yeah, he's a brilliant footballer, isn't he? He's absolutely brilliant footballer. I mean, I said to my granddaughter, find out what nightclub he goes to, marry him, get his credit card. Divorce him, but keep the credit card. Why not? Professional? Let's turn that on its head. A guy from Wolfsburg in Germany last week, football player for Wolfsburg, actually went down for a penalty, and he turned to the referee who'd given the penalty, and he said to the referee, it wasn't a penalty, I stumbled. And he was absolutely mocked by the media and the press. Now, it's all very easy. They were winning 2-0. I don't know if he would have done it if they were losing 2-0. But the point is, we sometimes talk of a professional foul in football. Professional being to get the right commercial outcome. That's not what we mean by professionalism here. Professionalism and the public interest is upholding a certain level of certain standards, in society. And sometimes we try to reinforce that with codes. Many professional institutes have them, and in some professional institutes they're binding. We're not there yet in banking, because the Chartered Institutes Code is a very good one. In fact, the Chartered Institute has 2 of them, unfortunately. And it's all very good. But I actually like what Simon Thompson said. He's the chief executive of the Institute. He said there is nothing stopping the government right now from saying these are the standards and you must adhere to them. It's actually a little bit of nervousness on the government's part, I think, some might say cowardice, to enforce a set of standards on an industry that needs those standards desperately. Because make no mistake, there were 12 pages in Chartered Banker last month about ethics and building reputations and all this sort of stuff. And it's fine because everybody agrees what you need to do to achieve ethical standards, but they just don't get it. And they're no better now at it than they were 5 years ago at the top of our industry. We're doing certain things better, but everybody who comes to these classrooms in Bangor knows perfectly well what's right and wrong. And I think a lot of us have been let down by our lords and masters in that respect. Not necessarily your personal bosses, but people who lead the industry. Now, I have to tell you, I had a wonderful conversation with somebody at the Institute because I was reading a newspaper, I was reading an advertisement for a function. What was that gorilla's name at RBS? That's him, yeah, Goodwin. He was doing a talk somewhere. I forget what it was, about 3 or 4 years ago. And I asked the difficult question. I really asked the tough question. I rang the Institute and I said, Fred Goodwin's doing a talk next week. Is he? Yes, he is. I said, he's got FCIBS after his name. Why is he still a member of my institute? And I got, oh, shut up, Bob, you know. But it's a serious question. Because he's your back marker. Because if he can join, anyone can. You have Nick Leeson, you know. I'm sure he's a nice guy, and I'm sure his mother loves him. But do I want to be a member? I don't know. I think it's a difficult one to call because he never did anything illegal. I don't think. And it goes back to the start, doesn't it? Subjective.
It's difficult how you actually expel someone if they've done nothing illegal and
concrete boot.
Yeah,
River
potentially the repercussions of doing that. But also you've got the guy who was at the head of the co-op.
Yeah.
Who was
Flowers.
was a fellow. Now he did something illegal, so was actually expelled.
Was he? Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, we're getting there then. There'll be institutes all over Europe saying, "Can we do that?" You know. But this is a really kind of serious issue about what sort of profession do you want it to be. You know. And where are you going to draw the lines? What place has the Institute's code? We'll go on to corporate responsibility after a break. But are we all right so far? Are you comfortable? Isn't it easy? Yes. Sonia, you're just loving it, aren't you?
I am.
Yeah. Barclays, yeah?
Yeah.
You don't look like you're Barclays. Yeah. Let's have a nice cup of tea, cup of coffee. If you want marijuana, you'll have to go out the courtyard. Yes. RBS, yeah? Oh my God. You admit it?